Okay, I'm going to show you how to mix up pizza crust. The first thing you do is, of course, to gather all of your equipment and ingredients. This recipe calls for a teaspoon of salt, a teaspoon of sugar, a package of active dry yeast, which we'll have to wake up here, 10 ounces of flour by weight, and 6 ounces of warm water. So we're going to start with the water first, just to make sure that we can give time for our yeast to awaken. If you turn on your tap to the hottest setting and you let it run for a little while, you should get about 115-degree water. Remember, we mentioned in class that yeast needs 3 things to activate. It needs moisture, water, it needs food, which we'll get in the form of the sugar, and it also needs warmth. We don't want to make the water too warm because anything over 120 degrees is really going to kill your yeast and prevent your product from rising. Once we have our water the right temperature, go ahead and open up your yeast. You will have to take a scissors and open it up. You aren't going to be able to tear the package. And then deposit your yeast directly into your water. Now it's going to need a stir, so you can just take a fork and help stir that up, and it's going to dissolve. It's just going to take a little while. Now it needs to be fed, so to that we're going to add a teaspoon of sugar. Keep stirring, get it all off the sides, let it dissolve really well, and then we're just going to set it aside for a while. And one thing you're going to notice that as this yeast sits in the water, you're going to start to see bubbles, and those bubbles are the carbon dioxide that yeast gives off as it grows. Okay, so make sure there's no big clumps on the bottom of your measuring cup, and then just set that off to the side. And we're going to turn our attention to the flour. Now, in order to measure the flour by weight, you're going to need to use a scale. So go ahead and turn that on. Take a medium mixing bowl, place it on the scale, and then you're looking for the button that says tare, T-A-R-E. Press it once, and what that is going to do is it's going to cancel out the weight of the bowl. So now the only thing that's being measured is what we place in the bowl. And we're looking for 10 ounces of flour. Okay, I got a little too much, so we'll just take some out. Now, don't put your flour away. It may be that we're going to need a little extra as we make our dough, so keep it handy. But this is the primary flour. This is what we want to work with first. So now that we have our flour measured, we can start to assemble the remaining of our dish. So you're going to take a large mixing bowl. And into the large mixing bowl, we are going to take our measuring cup that has the yeast in it and add that to the bowl. We are going to add our salt, 1 teaspoon. The salt is going to do a couple different things in our recipe. It's going to improve the flavor. It's also going to prevent the yeast from growing too quickly. We're going to take our flour, and we're going to take half of the flour that's in this bowl into the yeast mixture. You don't have to measure it out. You could measure out 5 ounces, or you could just guesstimate. So we're going to dump that in there. Take a wooden spoon. Do not use your fork. Take a wooden spoon and combine it in. It is going to be very, very loose. It is still far too wet to attempt to knead, but that's okay. We're just getting started here. Now at this point, if your group would like to, you can add in a tablespoon of herbs. This is a spice mixture that has a lot of Italian spices, Parmesan cheese, and some crushed red pepper. I like it, so I'm putting it in, but that'll be up to your group. It's just going to improve, or enhance, I should say, the flavor of your crust. Mix it in really well. We don't want any big giant clumps of it in our dough. All right. Now, we're going to add half of the remaining mixture. So basically, 1/4 of the original mixture is going to go into the bowl. So there is still some flour left in our medium bowl. It's going to get harder to mix in, but do take your time. The dough is going to start to come together in the middle of the bowl, and that's what we want to see. All right. The next step is to knead your dough. Now there's a couple different ways that you can prepare this. Obviously you can use a nice clean countertop. To save on mess, you could take a flexible cutting mat and knead onto the mat. Problem is, the mat is very slippery. So if you took damp paper towels, wring them out really well, lay them on the countertop and then put the mat on top, it's going to help prevent the mat from slipping a lot. It's still going to slip, but it will give you a little more friction. I, on the other hand, am going to go right onto the countertop. Yes, it's messy, but you're not going to have to deal with the mat being annoying. We're going to take a little bit of our flour, not very much at all, and we're going to flour the countertop. We're actually going to put flour right on the surface of the counter. Don't put this away. We need it. We're going to take the dough. Now it's incredibly sticky inside this bowl yet, but we're going to put it right out onto the countertop, onto this pile of flour that we made. As we knead the dough, our goal is to develop the gluten to make it nice and strong, but we're also going to take all of the flour that's remaining in our bowl and work it into the dough. So, the first person that kneads, you are going to have messy hands. There is no way around it. Take out your dough. It's super, super sticky. Right into the center of your countertop. Like I said, messy hands. While you still have a clean one, take some more flour and put it on top of your dough. Now, flour your hands a little bit and start working the dough together. So this really isn't kneading. This is just pushing more flour into the dough until it's at a point where it's ready to be kneaded, where it's not going to stick to our hands. Now, while this is happening, someone else in your group needs to take your bowl, the one that we made the dough in, and get it washed, because we're going to need that bowl again, but more on that in a little bit. So I'm just kind of folding the dough in on itself at this point, just to work in more of that flour to make the dough handleable. We don't want it to be completely encased on our fingers. If you run out of flour on your countertop, you can just add some more, but I've got plenty right now. Work in what's on the countertop first, and once the dough becomes less sticky, where your hands aren't going to stick to it completely, we can actually start the process of kneading. Now, we talked about this a bit in class. Kneading is the process of pushing the dough, pulling it towards you, and turning it. Pushing, pulling, turning. Pushing, pulling, turning. How you choose to knead really becomes, your own. You can switch back and forth from one hand to the other. So in this process, what I'm doing in my hand is I'm pushing it and kind of twisting it, and I'm rolling it into the other hand. So it is getting the push, pull, turn. It's just doing it very quickly. And we're continuing to work in that flour. Every once in a while, put the dough on a spot that has no flour. Because if we try to just keep shoving flour and keep shoving flour, eventually your dough is going to get very, very stiff. And a very stiff dough now means you're going to have a very, very, very chewy pizza crust later, which we don't want to have. So every once in a while, work in a spot where there is no flour, and then go back in the flour again, and keep working. This process will take between 6 and 8 minutes. The whole time you need to move the dough. And every once in a while, get some more flour. Actually, it looks like I'm wiping the countertop with the dough. Wiping up that flour. Get it all in. You're going to be doing this for a while, so you can, of course, trade off with a group mate. I don't expect one person to need the whole thing. You can if you want to, and that will really be up to your group. But for the whole 8 minutes, you are moving the dough. We are stretching out that gluten, making it really, really strong so that it will support the weight of our toppings when we bake our pizza. If you were at home and you had, say, one of those nice upright stand mixers like KitchenAid, most of those come with something called a dough hook. You could speed this process up by making your dough in a mixer. The kneading process with the dough hook takes about 5 minutes, as opposed to the 8 by hand. But it does make a good stress reliever. Get a lot of frustration out on your dough. There is no too rough when it comes to bread dough. The more you work it, the stronger the gluten gets. The stronger the gluten, the better the structure. So I'm just going to stop for a second. When you put your hand in the dough, at some point we want the dough to no longer stick to your fingers. When we have reached that point, when the dough no longer sticks, you don't have to add any more flour. You do have to keep kneading, but you won't need to put flour in it. If, however, you touch the dough and it sticks to your hand, which that does, you're not done yet. More flour. The amount of flour you put in the dough can be dependent on a number of different factors, including whether you measure the water correctly. That's a big one. But if it's humid in the kitchen around you, it's going to take more flour to bring your dough together because the dough will help absorb moisture from the atmosphere. Speaking of absorb, this particular dough will absorb ink off of hands. So ladies and gentlemen, if you come to class on pizza day with Sharpie on your hands, like on the palms of your hands, and you knead the dough, you will transfer Sharpie into your pizza crust. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm not super a fan of Sharpie, so please don't write on your hands on pizza day, or I will, I happen to know this teacher who has this lovely soap, which will take that ink right off. All right, been at it for about 5 minutes. Now you notice I still have some flour in the bowl. That's okay. We don't have to use it all. It just comes down to your individual dough. And you're going to notice that some groups will use all their flour and then some, and some groups won't use hardly any other flour. Just depends on whether you measured the water right. If the water was the right temperature, that makes a difference too. Warm water will absorb flour differently than cold water will. All right, so we're going to do a dough check. And to do that, we're simply going to press the heel of our hand into the dough and see if it's sticky. This is slightly sticky, so it could use just a little bit more flour. So it's not 100% ready yet, but it's very, very, very close. So when I say a little bit of flour, I do mean a little bit of flour. At this point, we don't want to overload it. This is going to make your crust very dry. And no amount of sauce can save a dry pizza crust. All right, I've reached the 6-minute mark on the kneading. So let's take a check. If I pull it all together here, and your palm no longer sticks, you have made pizza dough. All right, now that we have our dough, and we have determined that it is not sticky, we need to turn our attention back to that bowl, which someone in your group washed. We're going to take a tablespoon of oil and we're just going to pour it right into the bowl. We don't want the oil in the dough. That will make the dough very, very greasy. What the oil is going to do is we're going to take the dough and we're going to place it in the bowl and we're going to roll the dough around to completely coat the surface with oil. What this is going to do is it's going to prevent the surface of our crust, or surface of our dough, from developing a crust as it sits in the refrigerator. This is going to get covered with saran wrap now that we have coated the dough with the oil, and it's going to go into the refrigerator overnight. If you were making this at home and you wanted pizza in one day, you would simply cover this with a towel and place it in a warm spot in your kitchen and let it rest for between half an hour to 45 minutes. After that time, the dough would rise. The yeast continues to grow. It's munching on all that sugar. It's munching on some of the flour. So as it grows, it's going to give off carbon dioxide and cause this to lift. Okay, folks, it is day 2, and as you can see, our dough has risen, has doubled in size. You'll need to send someone up to the kitchen to collect your dough. I will have it setting out for about 45 minutes just to let it warm back up, because it's easier to knead a warmer dough than it is a cold one. But for now, I'm just going to put that aside and turn our attention to our pan. In order to prepare the pan for your pizza, we will have to grease the pan. If you skip this step, you will not get your pizza off later. So what I have here is just some vegetable shortening. You could also use Pam. We're just going to take a paper towel, get a little bit of grease on there, and we are going to spread it on the pan. And we do this to keep the pizza from sticking so that it will release later. Like I said, if you skip it, you will not get your pizza off. Make sure you've greased the entire pan, get the edges, the rim if your pan has one. And now you can put that off to the side as well. In order to prepare your dough for getting onto the pan, we have to knead it a little bit more. So we're going to take the plastic wrap off. You can simply throw that away. And you will need to get a little bit of flour. We're going to repeat what we did yesterday. We're going to take a little bit of flour, spread it on the countertop, not very much. We just don't want the dough to stick. Take your dough, and we're going to go straight to the countertop. And first off, just kind of press it down, just to release those air bubbles. Remove that out of there. Now, for about a minute, we're just going to work the dough to help loosen up some of those strands of gluten that we made yesterday, warm it back up, make it a little bit easier to get on the pan here in a few minutes. Now, while this is happening, someone in your group will need to take your tray and gather the rest of your ingredients. Today, we will need sauce, meat of your group's choice, and cheese. Now, you will have the option, and we'll discuss this on day 1 of our lab, to bring extra ingredients that you pay for yourself. We will just, like I said, we'll talk about this a little bit more, and that will be up to your group's choice. If you want, say, pepperoni on your portion of the pizza and somebody else wants Canadian bacon, you could do a half and half pizza. So after we've kneaded the dough for a minute, we will contemplate getting this dough onto our pan. Okay, to get your dough onto your pan, first we're going to flatten it out into a disc. So just take and press it right onto the countertop, and we're just kind of moving it outwards into a disc shape. You can also pick it up and start to stretch the dough. Our goal here is to not tear a hole in the dough, which is something that we won't be able to repair. So we're letting gravity be our friend. We're just turning it in a circle and just kind of stretching it out with our fingers. Now, once your dough has made into a nice disc, we're actually going to take it and place it in the center of the pan. Now we're going to work from the center out. We don't want to tear the dough, but we do want to press the dough lightly outwards with our hands. We want to keep it even all the way around, so I'm spinning the pan as I go, and I'm pressing outward. So I'm using my whole hand and just slight pressure because we don't want to tear the dough, because then we'll have a hole which all of our ingredients will leak through. So we're going to press it outward, and we're going to keep it nice and even all the way across. And you're going to find that after you let the dough sit for a little bit, it'll want to shrink back in. If that happens before you go to put on your ingredients, stretch the dough out again. Just press it outwards to the center so that we have a nice, even crust all the way across our pan. Now, something you can do to help prevent big pockets of bubbles to form is to take a fork and just poke holes in your dough all the way around. And this is going to help prevent some of those really big bubbles from forming. Don't worry about sauce leaking through as the dough cooks. Those holes will all kind of fuse back together. So you can make some liberal holes all the way across your dough. Just like that. Okay, next phase is toppings. The first topping we're going to put on is 3/4 of a cup of sauce. This is just a plain pizza sauce. Take a spoon, please, not a rubber scraper. We don't want to dye them orange. And just spread your sauce around your pizza. We're looking for a nice even layer. Go all the way up to the edge. You can leave a little bit of a lip around if you want a really thick crust on the edge, or you can go closer to the edge if you like. But 3/4 of a cup of sauce. Now, the next two ingredients, the meat and the cheese, you can choose if you want to put the meat first, then the cheese, or the cheese first, then the meat. It'll really be up to your group. Today I'm going to use pepperoni. So you're going to arrange your pepperoni on your pizza. Could be Canadian bacon, could be hamburger. If you brought things like green peppers or mushrooms, you could include them in at this point as well. Arrange your topping. And then cheese. Now you could do, like I said, put the cheese down first and then put the meat on top of it. That'll really be up to your preference of your group. Once you have arranged all your toppings, we will go into the oven and bake. Okay, my timer has just gone off. I initially set the timer for 15 minutes and decided that I did not like the doneness of my pizza, so I did let it go a little longer. Have a cooling rack on your stove. We are not going to put our pizza pan directly onto our countertop. The cooling rack is going to just help protect the stovetop a little bit. Your pizza goes onto the cooling rack. Now, before you do anything else, please reach over, hit cancel on your oven, shut it off. Now, in a perfect world, we would let this pizza sit for 5 minutes just to allow everything to just kind of set. We're not going to have enough time for that, so take your pizza cutter. Be sure you get a good grip on the pan. Make sure you have the pot holder. And you are going to cut your pizza. Now, there will be 4 people in your group, so you can choose to simply cut your pizza into 4 very large quarters. Or, if you're feeling a little bit more on the manners side of things, you can cut it into 8 slices. Now, if you think back to the monkey bread, I had a rule. The person who cuts chooses their slices last. So, if that's not an incentive to cut your pizza evenly, I don't know what is. Regardless of whether you have 4 people in your group or 3 people in your group, you will only be allowed a quarter of the pizza. So that means if there are 3 people in your group, there will be a section of pizza remaining that is not for you to eat. I will find a hungry, hungry teacher. There are plenty of them in the school. At this point, dig in.